You do not want to miss this episode. We're going to talk about the cost of acquisition. And Nelson Nash talks about this in his book, Becoming Your Own Banker. There's a lot of hidden costs that people don't take into account. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Control and Compound. I'm Darren Mitchell, and joining me as always, Christina Wyatt. Christina, how you doing today?
Hey Darren, I am doing great. Excited to do another portion of Nelson Nash's Becoming Your Own Banker book review. And I'm really excited for this topic because I think it's one that people might miss.
Yeah, I actually, I love this portion of the book. It's page 68 in Becoming Your Own Banker for those of you that have the book. And we're going to talk about the cost of financing versus the cost of acquisition first. So those are two different costs. So we understand usually the cost of financing, but we overlook the cost of acquisition. So we're going to break those down. When we talk of cost of financing or even cost of capital, so we spend a lot of time talking about cost of capital. In other words, if you're on the compound interest curve and you cash out your investment to go acquire something, it's not just what it cost you, but a missed opportunity cost of what that money could have grown to, right? If you go to cash out 80 or 100,000 for a down payment on a house, well, what would that 80 of 100,000 have grown to? And then we get into the cost of financing with respect to an interest rate. What is the total interest on this loan over the time, or how much interest do you pay each year? So that's really more the cost of financing, the cost of capital. But we're going to talk about the cost of acquisition. So what's different there, Christina?
Yeah, so this is a completely different cost and a bit of a mind shift, as Nelson does. He has us thinking outside of the box about different things. And the cost of acquisition is actually the time and the effort that you have to put into getting that financing. So time is not free, right? Time is a very valuable thing, and we all value it a lot, and we never really put a price tag on it sometimes. And that's what Nelson is trying to do here. So he opens up this portion of the book by talking about a magazine ad that he saw that the company had said that the cost of the hammer is $17, but the actual cost of the hammer is worth 7 people's time, which would make it $100. And what he kind of meant by that is that 7 people had to walk by that hammer before it was actually purchased. So that store had to have 7 people view it before it actually was purchased for that $17. So the actual cost of acquiring that buyer was $100 overall for that time, right? So he kind of opens it that way, which gets us thinking, okay, how much time do we spend on acquiring our financing with the banks, with the lenders? And then your mind starts shifting, right? And he starts getting into those other stories.
Yeah, I like the Lee Iacocca story. Now, for a lot of listeners, they won't remember Lee Iacocca and Chrysler, but he was a Ford executive that went on to run Chrysler and took Chrysler from basically bankruptcy into a very successful company. But when he arrived there, he said, "Oh wow, things are worse than I thought." And he said, "I wouldn't have done it if I had known it was this bad." And then for them to before they could do anything, they had to get government backing for the loans. And great, to get government backing for these corporate loans, he said we had to hire lobbyists, we had to have lunch and drinks and dinners, months and months, all kinds of time and money, till finally the government said, "Woohoo, we'll back these loans." But that was just step one. Then they had to go get the banks to actually approve the loans. So again, they had meetings after meetings and financials and back and forth. And then after all this, the bank gave them 1/3 of the money they were looking for. And they had to go through all of it again to get the next third and the next third. So when people look at the cost of acquisition, they're like, "Oh, great! They got government backed loans for X% interest. What a great deal!" But they don't take into account all that went on behind the scenes to get that. And that is a very costly enterprise to get or exercise to get all that stuff done. So you've got to take into account how much is your time and effort and all associated costs when you go to make an acquisition.
Yeah, that was a great example. It makes perfect sense. It didn't just happen overnight. There's a lot of work put into that. Another one he gives in the book is he says free money isn't even free. So free money isn't even free. And what does he mean by that? Well, he talks about nonprofits and charities, and he says that these these organizations can sometimes be the worst when it thinks about acquisition, because they think, oh, it's a charitable donation. It's a donor from the sponsor. That's free money, I guess, that we've gotten from them. But what they're not taking into account is the person that had to, find that donor, speak to the donor, present to them, persuade them to want to support the cause. Like, there was a whole slew that went into this before that donor might have made that, made that contribution. And sometimes we don't look at that. So he said that even some, a lot of those nonprofits out there, they're spending about 85 cents to get that dollar. Now, some of the really good ones, the more efficient ones, are about 15 cents to the dollar, but you are spending money in order to get that dollar to come in, because there's time and there's effort that is put into bringing those funds into the charity, into the nonprofit.
Yeah, money just doesn't appear. There's a cost to acquire that money. So let's bring this back to sort of, how does this apply to the consumer or the listener, Christina?
Yeah. So I like, your mind starts turning and you're thinking, okay, so how does this apply to me? Well, time is valuable. We talked about that. There's a cost associated with it. And many of our listeners out there are business owners. They are real estate investors, and their time it can be very valuable, right? If they can sit down in front of a client, they can, work in their sales. Their time can be up to, $1,000 an hour, more than that in what they can do. So when they have to take their time and work on, refinancing a deal. So now you're at the lender's office and you're working with the bank and you're on the phone. I remember a story you told me when you're trying to do a wire transfer and you're in there for 45 minutes trying to get this done. Like just being even in the bank for a minute. And it's like, that time is extremely valuable. What if you have to go, as a business owner, you need a piece of equipment and now you have to go to the bank. You have to get that loan. You have to apply for it. There's paperwork. You're sitting there, you're signing off, you're providing your financials. This is, your time that you're spending. You're negotiating fees and rates with private lenders if you're into the real estate side of things, right? Or you're winning over your investors for your next project. Like, these are all things that you're doing to acquire that money that you need for that next project or for your business. And all of that time that you've put in it has a cost associated to it. And it's the value of your time, right? If you're making $1,000 an hour and you just spent 20 hours working on a refinance, well, that's $20,000 that could have been brought into the business versus spent on that refinancing deal, right? Pretty crazy when you think about it.
Yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of examples, like people that will drive into seven different grocery stores to save on grapes and stuff. And if you have the time, great. But I'm not doing that. Like, I don't have the time to go to 7 different stores. That's why I love Amazon. It's like, oh, I need all this stuff. I'm like, oh, I'll just order it online and it'll be here the next day. I don't have to go to the grocery store, the drugstore, and whatever other store, the hardware store. I can get that stuff on Amazon, and my time is valuable. And a lot of people probably went through a similar exercise, but I remember one of the first business coaches I had when I first started my business. It was, he sat me down and he said, okay, how much money do you make when you're in front of your top 20 clients per hour? And, had me figure out how much I made. And it was like, okay, you're making this much an hour. And then how much time do you spend paperwork, filing, applications? And we started figuring that out. And he goes, that's $20 an hour work for that job that you're doing. But you should be doing that, 1,000 or a couple thousand or whatever it was per hour job all the time. So why don't you have a full-time assistant? And I remember that was, my first year in the business when I ended up hiring a full-time assistant. It was like, yes, it was an expense, but really it was the cost of acquisition. In other words, what it was costing me, I couldn't bring in all that extra money I could have if I was focusing on that. So a lot of people kind of think short-sighted on these things, think they're saving money when they're really not, because they're not bringing in all of the other costs associated with it. Same as in education, right? Like, if you become a doctor or a lawyer, there's a cost to that, right? There's a cost of acquisition, but in the long run, it works out so well. And that's why I think business owners and real estate investors get this, because you start a business, it's not free. You need, startup costs, you'll invest a lot of money. You're probably not going to make money in the first period of time. You have all these fixed costs, but long term, you're looking to make a lot of money. But it's, you have to remember the cost of acquisition to start that. Same with real estate. You don't make money a lot of times in year one. You make money long term. I remember there was a real estate investor, or sorry, IBC practitioner down the States, a friend of ours. He got into the business. He wasn't an infinite banking practitioner. He went to he went to try to buy this real estate deal, and he thought he had it. And then the guy came back and said, "Listen, someone else bought it. They were able to close in 2 weeks." And he goes, 2 weeks? How could this guy close in 2 weeks? He goes, but he was a young guy, and he said, "You know what? Can you tell me the guy's name?" And he actually called the guy up that beat him on the case, or the real estate purchase, and he had lunch with him, and he said, like, "Can I just learn what you're doing? Like, how were you able to do this? My bank was going to take weeks and financials." And the guy said, "Well, my grandfather started these insurance policies, and now my parents have them and I have them, and the family uses this money to finance all our real estate deals because we can act so quick. So we can close on the deal and then go refinance and get the bank financing." And that's literally what got him into the business. He goes, "Well, I want to learn more." And now he left his previous job, and he's a full-time practitioner, very successful guy in the States. So, that time, it's like if you were going to buy a place in 2019 or 2020 when interest rates were really low and prices were low, and you delayed that because you didn't have access to the cash for a down payment, or you were nervous. Well, if you delayed that purchase 2 years, what was the cost of acquisition then? It was probably up 50%. Interest rates were up 2 or 3 points. So that delay meant your cost of acquisition was significantly higher. Okay, so that's kind of how I look at the cost of acquisition. Time, money, combine the two. That's your true cost.
Yeah, absolutely. And you kind of started touching on it, but obviously Nelson's going to bring back the infinite banking concept on this and in this, and you just did. But really, we've discussed the problem being the cost of acquisition, right? We've got that cost there. So that's the problem. What's the solution? Well, the infinite banking concept becomes the solution, right? We set up that policy, and now we've established a bank for ourselves, right? We've got that bank that we can go to, that we've got access to, because we have that high cash value policy we have access to 90% of the cash values at all times, no questions asked. Like, these loans are, as Dan would put it, the holy grail of loans. We have access to them. We can pay them back when we want, how we want, if we want to. They're unstructured, they're uncallable, they can't be called, right? Like, there's just these loans we're in control of them, right? We decide the repayment terms. We're not beholden to a bank for them. And that's really where where the solution comes, right? Because what that deal that you just spoke about, where they had the real estate deal. And I always say, when does the deal of a lifetime happen? Well, it happens when someone needs money and when someone has money. And when you have one of these policies, you always have access to your money, right? No questions asked. You're not going to be filling out an application. You're not going to get a credit check. You're not going to do any of those things, because those loans are contractual. Right inside your contract, they're going to lend you that 90% of those cash values, which is really important here, because that's what's going to eliminate that cost of acquisition. You have that all solidified. You have that ready to go. When you find that deal, you know where you're going, and you're going to, your high cash value policy that you've put there for this opportunity to arise.
Yeah, I bought a piece of real estate in 2019, 2020, and it was a long closing date, and prices started skyrocketing, and they were kind of trying to get out of the deal if they could. And then the bank came back the week before and said, "Yeah, I know we approved the mortgage, but we got a problem with this piece of land. We need more information." And I wasn't going to be able to close, but I had the cash in the cash value life insurance policy. I immediately got a loan. I closed on the deal, ended up refinancing like a couple of weeks later. But if I didn't have the access to that money, I don't think the deal would have happened. So having access to money, it can completely change your life. And then just sort of to wrap up here, I want to give you an analogy. Like, so many people think of saving and investing in the short term instead of the long term. So you look at an infinite banking policy or infinite banking concept, and you buy a policy, and it's like, well, in year 1 or 2, I actually have less cash than I would if I did, X, Y, or Z. but you've got to think long term. And Nelson talks a lot about that. So the analogy I like is if you wanted to run a marathon and a coach came to you and said, listen, I'm going to be your coach for this marathon. I can train you, but here it's got to go like this. You are going to be in the bottom half the first mile. You're going to be close to the back of the pack, maybe even. And then by mile 2 or mile 3, you're still going to be in the back half. You'll be doing a little better. You'll start to pick it up in about mile 3. But I can guarantee you by mile 10, you're going to be ahead of everyone else. And every mile after that, till we get to the finish line at the 26th mile, you're going to be increasing your lead over everyone else. And when you cross that finish line at mile 26, you are going to be the clear champion, win by miles. Are you okay being at the back of the pack in the first couple miles of this race? And if your answer is yes, then you're ready for an infinite bank. You're ready for the infinite banking concept, because that's kind of how our policies work. You're going to start a little slow, but man, once you get that going, you're gonna beat all the non-infinite bankers. So that's infinite banking. That's the cost of acquisition. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for watching this episode of Control and Compound. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell button so you never miss a new episode. And if you're ready to learn more, head to our website, controlandcompound.com. The link's below.